Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. We have had better days in the city of New Orleans, I have to say. Just coming to you all with just a heavy heart in regards to where we've been, how we've somewhat made it through where we're going. But the bottom line is, the bottom is kind of fell out in ways that we were bracing ourselves for, but always hopeful. And I'm still remain hopeful. But the reality is we are in a fiscal crisis here in the city of New Orleans. I am joined by my CAO, Gilbert Montaño, and Norman White, who is my Chief Financial Officer for the city of New Orleans. So first, just to get started, I want to thank all of our city employees just for their incredible commitment, dedication, and sacrifice throughout this entire pandemic. And really, I can name a whole list of things since I've been mayor of the city a little over 2.5 years now. But it has been that unwavering support and dedication of the city employees that continue to not only face challenges, but move through them. So I want to thank my people for that. They've showed up every single day and worked tirelessly to serve this city and that we all love. The pandemic has affected the city's entire workforce. City Hall is not immune. You've heard me say this, and us as a team say this from the start, in terms of how we have been dealing with COVID-19 and the impacts on the city of New Orleans. We're currently experiencing an unprecedented fiscal crisis, as again, these are unprecedented times. Just like many other cities across the country. And just on, I believe it was Friday, Mayor Suarez and I, my brother mayor in Miami, and I were featured in a Washington Post article where we were talking about just the fiscal challenges that our cities face, and us being really equal in terms of hospitality industry, our tourism industry, of course our population being under that 500,000 threshold, which prevented us from getting our CARES Act dollars directly from the federal government, now having to bypass and go through the state. For him, it was his county. But my point is, the city of New Orleans is not alone in this. My administration has spent the last 2.5 years righting the financial ship. We came into this pandemic in a strong financial position, the strongest since Hurricane Katrina, as a matter of fact. We had a surplus, millions in that, strong fund balance, and even an upgrade from Moody, which was a big deal. We celebrated that. Our conservative fiscal management, along with our significant cost-cutting measures over the past 6 months, has allowed us to preserve our workforce and not force us to eliminate or really implement furloughs and layoffs until this point. I made that very clear in a recent State of the City, how we've really doubled down and taken just the longest road as it relates to not wanting to furlough nor lay our people off. We have realized the bottom of our economy has dropped. Our singular focus since the beginning of COVID-19, of course, as you know, has been keeping our people safe. To do that, we've had to make some very difficult decisions, and this is, again, one of them. We have not had any large festivals, as you know, and of course, this has been since Mardi Gras of this year, of 2020. As economic activity has stalled, revenue has fallen dramatically. And again, we've shared this information with you throughout this pandemic. While we are ready to proceed, phase 3, that 3.1, the fiscal challenges just continue to remain. We must continue to manage our financial position accordingly. But now, right now, and into the future, the upcoming budget and fiscal year will be unlike any other that we've seen as a city, particularly as we focus on 2020, which not done yet, and even looking into 2021. As we have said, we are projecting a loss of about $150 million in revenue for year 2020 alone, and more than 20% loss of revenue, again, from the city. And when you think about our businesses and doing that math, our businesses have lost an upward of $2.67 billion. So they're hurting as well. With the help and cooperation of our employees, the administration took swift and decisive action earlier this year to reduce expenditures. Give you a few of them. To date, we have instituted both expenditure and hiring freezes across the board. We've managed overtime use significantly. Did not fill any vacant positions at all. We reevaluated the city's contractual obligations as well. We've asked departments to submit budget reduction plans for the remainder of 2020. We have been successful with these efforts, and they have resulted really in an estimate of about $40 million in savings for the city, but it's just not enough. Now, this is also in addition to using some one-time money that we were able to get on the front end, coming before COVID even started. And that was one, looking at fair share, getting those dollars. We had a great little settlement come in from Harris Casino that we've used. Lease agreements, you've heard me say, even the Champion Square lease agreement I kind of used as an example of where the city hadn't gotten a dollar off of that hard work, getting our fair share there, putting that to use. Franchise agreements, you've heard me talk about that as well. One example, CenturyLink, getting in a check for $5 million, even special funds. You've heard me talk about those funds that had not been touched in over 30 years plus. We've done everything possible, everything within our power to avoid taking personnel actions that would impact our hard-working men and women who really do drive the work here within City Hall. Our dedicated employees, and knowing the tough economic times we all find ourselves in. Shared sacrifice, it's a real one. So today, I'm calling on our Civil Service Commission to fast track a plan to invoke one furlough day for each of the 6 remaining pay periods. It's important to lead by example, and so that means that me as mayor, I will too participate in that furlough day. And I will request that every elected official do the same who receive their salary from city funds. Very important. And I'm also asking all of my unclassified employees to take that same day with me. And that means we work on the day that is furloughed. So we come in and we work in spite of. This is another, and as I mentioned earlier, just another tough decision that we're having to make collectively. And we realize it simply may not be the last. To our employees, please know that the proposed furloughs are a budgetary management decision to ensure that we can balance the 2020 budget. Very important. It is not a reflection on the performance of our people at all. They're dedicated, they demonstrated that, but we have to take this step. We have seen how, again, our people have stepped up and how they have even reimagined how they serve the public, being very creative and innovative in our approaches. And we are just immensely grateful. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gilbert. Now, we continue, as I've said and you've heard me say, go after the CARES Act money that we know that we deserve as the city of New Orleans. We will continue to do that. The city is anticipating receiving only $60 million of the $200 million in submitted expenses, eligible expenses to the state. So that's about 40% of our costs recovered from the federal program designed, again, to help local municipalities. This would have been an economic lifeline that we would have been able to depend on, so we would not be here today. But the impacts are real and they're very significant, which have caused me to have to submit a letter to the Civil Service Commission asking for them to waive the 30-day period to allow me and our administration to move forward with furlough days. Again, 1 day per pay period. We have 6 between now and the end of the year, and we're asking that they are favorable to this request. Because at the end of the day, if they're not, it means that we will then have to double down on significant days, meaning continuity in those days. And so with this approach, it really lessens the burden on our people with spreading it out over a 6 pay period and then 1 day associated with that pay period. So I'm gonna ask my CAO, Gilbert Montaño, to come forward, and we'll take it from there. Gilbert?
It is a heavy day for the city of New Orleans. I think the mayor covered a significant portion of the rationale and the implementation program, and I'll try to get a little bit more into the timing and some of the granular detail associated with the furlough day. If you notice, we're the beginning of Q4, and we had imagined and we have built our budget for 2020 with the astronomical revenue drop over the course of the last 6 and 7 months. As the mayor said, we've instituted every possible venue we could on the expenditure side of the balance sheet and tried to predict to our best of our ability on the revenue side of the balance sheet. However, as the mayor said, we held off as long as possible in a prudent financial position, waiting on the CARES Act. We had anticipated, as the mayor said, an eligible $150 million. We will be receiving potentially $60 million, which is 40% of that. We can't hold off and wait any longer. The most important thing for the city of New Orleans to do, financially speaking, is maintain a structural balance. One of the fears that we had was to carry over a deficit into 2021, and that is something certainly that we are preventing. We want to ensure that our revenues and the predictability of where we're going for 2021 is set at a baseline of a non-deficit spending perspective. It is important to note, and I know the question may come, the COI and some of the other dynamics and our fund balance and some of the other positions. Because of the structural integrity of the overall general fund and the fund balance, it's important for us to preserve the COI. That is, of course, was requested in regards to a cash flow. We do not want to borrow our way out of this issue. We're addressing it directly through expenditure cuts and trying to manage accordingly on the prediction of where our revenue goes. As far as our overall spending and where we go from here, the furloughs will approximate for the last 6 pay periods about approximately 10% cut to employee salaries, if you take the math, 1 day per pay period. And we will have to look and determine as we continue to build our 2021 budget. Now, everything in some ways is conflating relative to how we are doing our math, both at the end of 2020, the Q4, and into 2021, inclusive of the 20% reduction plan the mayor has asked all departments to submit. This is exclusive of that, and we're going to have to manage accordingly. The other major important piece that I wanted to target specifically is the implementation, the execution of the furlough day. This is thousands of employees that won't be at work on certain days, and how do we manage accordingly to blunt and as minimal of an impact to services that we possibly can to city residents. Over this last few days, I've been talking with various public safety entities because the furlough is going to all public safety and general fund and special fund agencies as well, to blunt how the deployment and the strategies will go. One of the fears we had is overtime to rise, to balance out the furlough day. We feel confident that our directors and our chiefs are going to manage through the plan and the scenarios, and frankly, having 1 day per pay period is a manageable opportunity, but we are requesting and will be discussing the management plans to implement so that we can move forward and not affect city these services in a major and catastrophic sort of way. We're confident that our public safety chiefs and our department directors will be able to manage through it. Mayor, I think that is the extent of the things I really think were important to cover. This is going to take effect October 10th, assuming the Civil Service Commission approves our request to waive that. And for 2021, everything still, of course, is on the table. The major pieces are the revenue side, on where we're projecting. We're still collecting about half of what we have in years past, or months past, pre-pandemic. And then lastly, what becomes, if anything, for the CARES Act. But at the end of the day, as we've always said, we're going to manage through this in a financial integrity position so that we maintain our abilities to bond correctly and not capture some of those interest costs in a structural balance without utilizing our rainy day fund, a significant portion of our fund balance, or our loan.
That's right. And Norman, anything you would like to add in this capacity? Okay, thank you very much, Gilbert, just for your hard work on this, and Norman as well. Ms. Montaño, what we'll do now is just go to Q&A, and then that will pretty much wrap up what we have to share at this time.
Yes, Madam Mayor. The lens.
So I'm trying to, Mr. Montaño, I took a look at the revenue projections that you're presenting to the council tomorrow, and while the budget shortfall obviously makes intuitive sense, I'm just looking at that revenue collection report, and we've actually collected more revenue this year so far, both in actual dollars and percentage of budgeted revenues. And I remember back in May when we first heard this $150 million shortfall number, you were saying that there was going to be, a $111 shortfall in sales taxes, but again, that presentation shows we're only $26 million from last year. So I'm just wondering how we have the current projection, or why that isn't showing up in that report.
Sure, thank you for the question. And this is also, I don't want to move around the question, but it's important to always look at things holistically. And you can't just look at one perspective on the revenue side. I have to balance it with all the other dynamics. What you're talking about and what you're looking at, without directly speaking to the paper, is some of the one-time revenues. And I'm going to ask Norm to jump in wherever I get off on this particular issue. So, as the mayor said, we had almost $100 million in one-time revenue come across this year that we will not see next year. Part of that had to do with Harris and the $60 million in the CARES Act. Where we've projected from there is where we have that deficit. So for 2020, if we were to myopically look at 2020, our revenue, inclusive of the overall one-time funds that we have, still puts us at a gap of approximately $41 million. Now you'll see in that report personnel savings of close to $22 million, and you'll also see our other operating savings up to $65 million. However, it's still not the end of the year, so we may not see those exact savings, and we're taking a very cautious perspective. As I said, most importantly, not to enter 2021 in a structurally imbalanced budget. It's the structure and the integrity of the budget that makes it so important. And for 2021, we'll see that significant revenue drop, as you saw, absent of the one-time money. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and so that $41 million figure, does that include both the $60 million from the CARES Act and the $40 million in expense savings that y'all have realized so far?
No, one is CARES Act, one is Harris, and the other is the savings you see is on the expenditure side of the balance sheet.
I gotcha.
What date is the report you're looking at?
It's through August.
Right, so if you look at that, if you look at the total number, and you subtract the 40 million from Harris and the 60 from CARES, you'll see the magnificent or the catastrophic difference.
Okay.
Right?
And my last question would be, how much do you expect to realize in savings from these furloughs?
It's about $1 million a day.
The pay period.
Yeah, $1 million per pay period. So 6 furlough days, we're expecting approximately about $6 million. Remember, we have to balance the operational efficiencies and the integrity, because this affects public safety agencies, it affects deployment, this affects catch basin cleaning. We have to make sure that we're managing that side of the equation and not just the financial side of it. So that's the reason you don't want to put a whole bunch in one, and why the request of the Civil Service Commission is so important, so that we don't have to collapse that request toward the last 30 days or the last 60 days. And where this carries over into 2021 is still yet to be predicted. We're in the process of building every one of those line item budgets and activities right now.
Thank you.
It's relatively the same thing, right? So it's 1 day per pay period. One pay period is about $1 million, so it's approximately that. Now those are approximate, right? We're gonna have the actuals when we actually have the savings, so I'll make sure to couch that.
WVSU.
And so 6 days, so this would mean, is this taking place this year or between this year and next year? The 6 days?
Six, we have.
October 10th.
Yes.
October 10th is when our request is to submit it through year end. Then we'll close the budget out for 2020 and then start for 2021.
Okay, so these 6 days, you know, will happen over the course of this year? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
WGNO.
Are you expecting them to go on to 2021? This isn't a problem that's gonna end at, you know, January 1, right?
Well, we will reevaluate that as we move through. And so right now, we're only looking at furloughs. But depending on our situation, we may have to look at layoffs, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I think that's a
We
good,
remain hopeful.
that's a good point. I mean, you have to look at the absolutes. We waited until Q4 to dive this deep because of the anticipation of the CARES Act. I think we will be more absolute going into 2021 and not bank on what may not have ever come to fruition so that we can operate in a more cohesive fashion. There were so many unknowns for the first 6 or 7 months on the revenue side and even the expenditure side, the adaptation side. Now we have more information and we're hopefully going to be able to more methodically calculate where we will end up with as much of a precision crystal ball per se that we can have when it's revenue that could drop or increase depending on resurgence or insurgence of COVID.
Absolutely. And with that same level, you know, of advocacy and push at the state level and even at the federal level so that we can get the resources we know we owe.
And why were you only getting 60 million out of 200 million that was promised from the CARES Act?
Well, because, sir, those dollars, if you may recall, were diluted and redirected. So out of the 1.8 billion that the state of Louisiana received of CARES Act dollars, the intent and spirit of that was that 800,000 would come to local municipalities throughout our state, Orleans being one. Well, that money was dwindled down by 300 million, then further 500, and the formula that was put in place by the governor and his administration again further diluted the resources that the city of New Orleans would receive. You know, initially they did the 70-30, you know, in terms of looking at the rate of spread. You know, we were a hot spot. We were that place in the state. You know, we turned it around twice, and we're getting, seems to be penalized from how well we were able to do. And so that formula doesn't work for us. And so as a result, 60 million coming to the city of New Orleans. It is my hope and it is my push at the federal level that any resources that come, you know, in another program or an act come directly to the city of New Orleans, not the state of Louisiana. And this is something that we advocated for on the front end. However, you know, that threshold, that 500,000 that was pulled out of the air, it hurt us. And so this is why I'm working with my brother Mayor Suarez in Miami. We're the same, you know, we're kind of in the same boat, but we are, know that it's not just our cities, but definitely we are on the edge of pushing for what we deserve.
Mayor, if I can add this, so to put the magnitude in place is roughly $1.3 billion that came to the state, we received 60 million of it.
The advocate.
I just wanna check on the numbers here. I think Gilbert said that there's still a $41 million gap going into the end of the year. Projected. And so if this is gonna cover 6 million of that, where does the other 35 million come from?
Thank you. So, couple answers to that, right? I mean, there's two different pieces we look at there. You know, the mayor did announce phase 3. We hope to see more generated economic activity to handle or potentially increase on the revenue side. The other piece of it is what I mentioned to the lens. You'll see in the council report, we still have a projected personnel savings teetering at the 22 million and growing as I hold all the vacancies and even double down on that. The largest number that you'll see in the projection is the other operating. So these are some of the contractual services that we deal, unencumbered contractual services that sit around $65 million. Now, I'm not articulating that that's what we have in the bank right now, but as we dwindle down those two sides, the other operating, the personnel spending, the furlough days, and the anticipation of increased revenue over the last quarter, we hope to come to a structurally balanced budget.
And then we wanna add in our retired.
Oh, that's right, thank you, Mayor. The other piece that we're really evaluating and implementing, frankly, is the early retirement process. Now, this started even prior. This was one of the first things that we started going through the process, but like anything else, it has a significant process through a NOMERS board, an actuarial analysis, and a city council vote, where the universe of about 300 employees that are eligible to retire can retire. We're trying to incentivize that so that we can better blunt both the latter part of this year and into the first quarter of 2021 savings. I'm also looking at both the attrition savings for our various agencies to determine how to best manage through the situation for, in all honesty, a recovering economy nationally. I think the numbers are showing more positive bounce back than what we first predicted 6 months ago, and that can change tomorrow, understanding the dynamic and the fluidity of it, but it does allow us, the question may come, why furloughs versus layoffs, one's structural, one's temporary, and I think the important reason is we're seeing this as temporary pain, but we're managing through some of those activity structural balances so that we can maintain the proper position for 2021 and be able to present to our bond rating agencies that we have a fiscally sound, structurally balanced budget with a strong fund balance, and we have not tapped into our cash reserves as relative to our COI.
And one that's not built on hope, but on action.
So, and sorry, just to clarify, when you were talking about the contracts and unfilled positions and all that, are you projecting more cuts to contracts and more unfilled positions, or are you just projecting big, okay, so within the next 3 months there'll be...
It is a zero-sum game. If it's 41 million, we're gonna find 41 million. I mean, that's the bottom line.
And so if we can, if you look at the numbers, if you're adding them up, the mayor spoke to 150 million, right? That was a loss. We walk in at 60 million for CARES Act, we're sitting at 90. Add the 40 million associated with the fair share, we're sitting at 50, right? The 40 million is talking about operational change for the vacancies and those alike, we're now sitting at 10, a little bit, maybe 6. You add in the furlough days, that takes us down to 6 to a zero sum from there.
And at this point, there's no plan to use the line of credit for this year, that'll be for next year, or?
We have to be thoughtful, right? That's a cash management tool. Right now, we have, Norman and his team have a cash bank analysis session weekly, just to determine where we are on our cash reserves to be able to pay our bills on a weekly basis. That's an ongoing, if there comes a period where we have to reevaluate that, then that's what it's there for. We don't want to use it to fill a gap, essentially. We want to make sure that we have it available for what it was designed, and that is to provide cash flow.
All right, if you recall the conversation we had, we always talk about it being a cash flow program, not a deficit recovering program. There's a difference between the two. As we receive cash, we ebb and flow based on our expenditures. So that is there for that purpose, to make sure cash is set aside, make sure we can pay for our expenditures.
Right. The mayor made it very clear we're not going to borrow our way out of this deficit, and I think that's an important piece to really ensure to the public and the agencies to manage through versus borrow or kick the can down the road.
WWL followed by Fox 8.
Do we have a number on how many city employees this is going to impact?
It's approximately 4,000, but I could probably get a more granular number for you.
Fox 8.
Have those employees been notified about this prior to this hour, and has there been any commitment from any department to work on that furlough day?
Okay, well, commitment from a department to work, well, all of unclassified will work on their furlough day.
And what kind of departments does that cover?
All of them. I have unclassified employees everywhere throughout all of our city departments. You asked another question, I forgot.
Have, the city employees been notified
Oh,
of
okay.
this prior to this hour?
Yes, city employees have been notified, of course, starting with our directors, our leadership teams, and we have been in constant communication about the financial challenges that we've been faced with just throughout this pandemic, and also just being very clear about how we have been able to utilize one-time money and get money that was just sitting, going through the cushions in the sofa, to find every dollar possible to keep our people working. And the fact that our folks have been working throughout this pandemic, that is an example and a testament to our hard work, and not only that, just how we care about our people. And moving with furloughs instead of layoffs, and understanding that we don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face, meaning we don't want to lose great talent, because it can take years sometimes to bounce back from these losses if you cut people. So we understand that, and we're just being very methodical and even surgical in some aspects so that we can keep city services going, at the quality and the level that we know our folks deserve, but striking that right balance, and we'll continue to do that.
Is there a fear that those employees won't show up to work on these furloughed days?
Oh, that's always, meaning unclassified employees being requested to show up on a furlough day. That is the expectation, that they will show up. It would be that or not having a job at all. I think these times we all want to keep jobs, and our people need them to feed their families and to take care of themselves. And so when you think about furlough versus a layoff, I think our people would choose the furlough. And I believe, based on the commitment that they've demonstrated, I know under my leadership as mayor, I do expect them to continue to show up as they've always done and not even complain about it, because they have not one time complained about leaning in as hard and heavy as needed to keep this city rolling.
Two more questions,
Go ahead.
I think part of what we're missing for you and I understand is the unclassified is the appointee person like myself, right? So the mayor say take a furlough day and be here, I will be here.
It's a
right?
pay cut for us,
Right,
essentially.
that's what she's speaking to. So when you say that we're gonna take it, then of course, right? So the difference between classified and unclassified, I think is your question.
That was
Two more
kind of my
questions,
question. I was
WSU
gonna
and
ask if all top city officials will also be required
Well,
to
they
take a
are
furlough.
unclassified employees, and yes, ma'am, it would be my expectation that they join me as a team, as they've continued really to stand with me and doing the work.
Definitely. One more question. If you could just explain the process with the Civil Service Committee. How
Okay.
does that work? Okay.
Well, the commission, I know, one, I have to make the official request, in which I have for them to waive the 30-day requirement. This would require them to initiate a special meeting. And they will take up the matter at that particular meeting. We'll know what what decision they will render at that time. Anything to add to that?
I think that's
Pretty much it.
Okay, Lynn?
Yeah, just two quick clarifications. On the unclassified employees, are you going to be asking them not only to take a furlough, but to come, is the furlough day itself, that optional thing that you're asking people to do, or you're just asking people to come in for the furlough day that's going to be executed, unilaterally?
Okay, unclassified employees on their furlough day, they will be requested to show up for work.
And they're mandated to take a furlough day?
They will take a furlough.
Okay.
Yes,
Um,
but we're asking that they work that day.
For sure. And then just one quick clarification on sales taxes specifically.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, is that looking up from where you guys thought, earlier in May? Because again, 26 million down from last year, and you're hoping that economic activity jumps up. Is there a new estimate for that
Well, we're
specifically?
hoping in the last quarter of the year and the holiday season and, feeling the love that folks will, and then of course with the economy opening, back up, we're really hopeful that the revenues will increase based on what we've seen, in the past. Anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly what we're doing. What we see is, it's remaining flat, since, March, right? We picked up what we expected in January and February, what we're seeing is that number is flat. We received a little bit of decrease in 1 month, but basically we're sitting at roughly half of what we received, or what we expect to receive based on the budget.
And so that $111 million stays, in terms of the estimate, stays pretty constant?
Right now, unless we see some changes based on what we see, yes.
Thank you.
Last question, Fox 8.
With yet another possible storm coming in by the end of
Delta.
the week, with all the budgetary considerations y'all have discussed today, have you included the expenses and overtime that's gonna be required with the support during another hurricane or tropical
We're in
storm?
the, listen, we're in the middle of it, and I tell you, we, are prepared, you know, as we've demonstrated. I have my call, first one tomorrow morning in terms of briefing, but we're factoring, these challenges in as well. And these are things you can't, you know, you plan for, but you don't plan for.
And if we may add this, that we always keep about $31 million sitting in a separate account that's not respected to what we're talking about here to deal with those emergency situations.
And just to add one last thing, we had to add $6 million to our expenditure for the last 6 scenarios, you know, hurricane prep that have occurred in 2020 as well. So that grew the expenditure number outside of what we had originally budgeted for by about 6 million.
So
Exactly.
Is that the sort of precipitating factor here, that you guys have already spent $6 million more than you expected and needed to make up for that?
It's part of it, yeah, these expenditures are real. And then also keeping in mind, just even I'm thinking about crystal ball. When you mentioned that, I thought about crystal ball because we have yet to get reimbursed for those expenditures, just to give you a sense of what we're dealing with.
Does this include the police officers, firefighters, and paramedics? Will they also work free for these 6 days?
The furloughs include, police officers, all public safety, my entire public safety team, we're all a part of it. And those, of course, you have classified and unclassified that are tied to that. So when we talk about working on your furlough day, that is for our unclassified employees. Just, okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you.